The sound of the mariachi band echoed through the Rodriguez family's backyard, blending with the laughter and chatter of nearly 100 guests. This was a July evening in San Antonio, Texas, the kind of weather that makes sweat stick to your skin and the smell of grilled meat linger in the air. My family had decorated everywhere with colorful lights and banners reading 30 años de amor to celebrate my parents' 30th wedding anniversary. I'm Maya Rodriguez, 32 years old, Lieutenant Colonel in the United States Air Force. Tonight, at my own family's party, I felt like a stranger. I wore simple civilian clothes, a white blouse and jeans, completely different from the cocktail dresses and shiny suits of the other guests. Diego, my older brother, stood in the center of the yard in his navy dress whites, telling stories about San Diego Naval Base as if he were performing a play. Everyone gathered around him, laughing loudly at every word. I tried to catch my mother's eye. Carmen Rodriguez stood by the buffet table, ladling more tamales onto Diego's plate as if it were a sacred ritual. "Hola, Mommy," I called out. Mom glanced at me briefly, a forced smile. "Hola, mija, go get some enchiladas, they're almost gone." Then she turned away immediately as my father stood up from his chair, holding a glass of tequila on the rocks. Victor Rodriguez, former Marine colonel, now a high-paid defense consultant, his authoritative voice rang across the yard. The entire garden fell silent. Phones were put down, conversations stopped. "I want to say a few words," his voice full of pride and power. "About my son, Captain Diego Rodriguez, who brings glory to the Rodriguez family with his brilliant career in San Diego." Applause erupted, cheers. Pride filled the air like fog. Then he turned to me. For a second, our eyes met, his cold, appraising, and empty. "As for my daughter," he said, his voice changing completely, "Maya has chosen her own path, a path that's difficult. Military cyber ops isn't an environment for women, but that's her choice." No tequila glass was raised for me. No name, just a dismissal so sharp it cut through the applause like broken glass. The silence that followed was louder than any explosion I'd ever heard in cyber warfare. Even the crickets stopped chirping. I felt my stomach turn to stone. My breath caught. I stood there, suddenly aware of every uncomfortable glance, of the neighbor kid's mouth hanging open mid-hot dog bite, of how Diego smirked into his drink. I wanted to disappear. Then came the twist of fate no one expected. The flat-screen TV on the patio, which had been showing baseball highlights, suddenly switched to a CNN breaking news alert. The anchor's voice was serious and clear. "We've just received confirmation from the Pentagon about a special promotion." My heart stopped beating. The screen displayed the Pentagon logo, then my photo in full Air Force uniform. My face, my name, my rank. The anchor read, "Lieutenant Colonel Maya Rodriguez, 32, has just been promoted to colonel and appointed as Director of Cyber Defense Operations at Peterson Space Force Base. She is the mastermind behind Operation Digital Shield, the most successful cyber counterattack in history against state-sponsored attacks." Absolute silence. No one clapped. No one cheered. The tequila glass in my father's hand trembled. The amber liquid swayed with it. The pride in his eyes drained like a broken dam. And me, I didn't smile. I didn't relish it. I felt nothing at all. Or rather, I felt too much. A flood of anger, sadness, and vindication, all fighting to surge up. But mostly I felt a deep hollow in my chest, as if I'd jumped from 10,000 feet without a parachute, and was still falling. They saw me now, but not as a daughter, just as an anomaly. And still no one said a word. As I stood there frozen, my fingers unconsciously tightened around the condensation-covered water bottle that I didn't even realize I was holding. No one looked me in the eye, not the uncles, not the cousins, not even the neighbor whose son I'd once pulled from an overturned pickup during the flash flood. Everyone looked down at the ground, at their drinks, anywhere but at me. The TV continued playing. My name again, this time with a ticker about my contributions to the International Cyber Defense Task Force. But no one commented. Not a single "I can't believe it" or "I had no idea," just silence. I turned and walked toward the house. My boots thudded on the patio's wooden deck. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the weight of every year I'd spent fighting. Not just the wars overseas, but for breathing room in my own family. In the kitchen, I stared at the counter. My mother's strawberry flan sat there untouched. I had made that cake. I'd brought it hoping that maybe, just maybe, it would bring a small warm moment, but no one had asked who made it, and now it sat there like me unnoticed. Behind me, the screen door creaked. I didn't turn around, I didn't need to. "You don't have to leave like this," my mother's voice said, soft and full of tension. "I'm not leaving," I replied just above a whisper. "I'm just walking." Mom sighed. "Your father didn't mean to hurt you." I laughed bitterly. "He didn't even say my name, Mommy." Mom didn't answer, just stood there, probably wringing her hands the way she did when she couldn't fix something without breaking something else. "I'm a lieutenant colonel," I finally said. "I've led missions that saved thousands of lives, but I'll never be good enough, will I? You don't need to prove anything to us. But I have, and I am, and I think I always will." Mom stepped closer, but I backed away. I wasn't ready. Not tonight. That's when I knew this wasn't just a bad night. This was the blueprint. This was who they'd always been. And me. I was done asking for a seat at a table that was already set for someone else's success. I remember the taste of MREs and instant coffee better than any birthday cake from childhood. The early years in the Air Force weren't glamorous at all. I was stationed at Peterson Air Force Base, Colorado, sleeping in shared dorms that smelled of old boots and industrial cleaning solution. Meals from plastic trays. Pay barely enough to live on, but I still managed to send money home. Every month, like clockwork, I wired a portion of my salary to San Antonio. I told myself it was for the house, maybe to fix the porch roof that always leaked during thunderstorms. I imagined Mom buying groceries, Dad finally fixing the wooden staircase that had been sagging. That's what I thought I was doing, helping out, being a good daughter, a responsible adult, a soldier who could carry more than just her own backpack. I skipped vacations, turned down weekend getaways, and declined invitations from my unit. While they went out drinking beer or took trips to Denver, I stayed behind, heating up dollar ramen in my room, routing my fun money to a family that barely acknowledged my existence. Once I turned down a 4-day pass to save money for what I thought would be my parents' anniversary gift, a new dishwasher. I ate off cardboard so Diego could eat off porcelain. Then came that phone call. A Sunday afternoon, the kind of time I allowed myself to indulge in a second cup of coffee and half a chapter from a Tom Clancy novel. Mom called while I was folding laundry. Mom's voice was cheerful, rushed. "Gracias por el dinero, mija," she said. Diego looked amazing in that Armani suit, fit like it was tailored. Perfect for the New York trip. Networking went great. "Ay, mija, you should see the photos." At first, I didn't understand. I actually smiled like an idiot. "What photos?" "Oh, you know, from the mixer, that rooftop event at the Empire Hotel. We couldn't have managed the flights and hotel without your help." My hands froze mid-fold. "You used the money I sent for Diego." "Well," Mom said, hesitating for the first time. "He really needed to look sharp. Opportunities like this don't come twice." I don't remember much about the rest of that conversation. I think I made an excuse and hung up. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. The room spun a little. I'd been living off dollar store groceries, passed on replacing worn boots, rationed toothpaste at the end of the month. Also, my golden boy brother could wine and dine in Manhattan. I sat on the edge of my bunk and stared at the floor for a long time. It felt like oxygen had been drained from the room. That's when something snapped. Not in rage, not in drama, just in finality. I never said a word about it to them. I just stopped sending money. No explanation, no fight, just silence. A few weeks later, the phone rang again. It was my father. "Maya," he barked. "Desde cuando te volviste tan egoísta, cutting off support for the family. You think you're too good for us now." I held the phone a few inches from my ear. His voice was familiar, commanding, entitled like I owed him a report. I brought it back to my mouth and answered, calm and cold. "I'm just learning from the best, sir." Then I hung up. That was the first boundary I'd ever drawn. No arguments, no rebuttals, just a quiet wall built brick by brick from every ignored sacrifice. It wasn't revenge, it was clarity. 3 years later, I came home to attend my cousin Isabella's quinceañera. The family was still living in the same house in San Antonio, but now there were new additions. Diego's new car in the driveway, a black BMW sedan, kitchen remodel with granite countertops, a 65-inch flat-screen TV in the living room. I was sitting in the garage, staring at boxes stacked high to the ceiling. That's when I found it. Buried behind Christmas decorations and old furniture, a wet cardboard box with faded black marker. Maya's stuff, my father's unmistakable handwriting, all capital letters like labeling a piece of government equipment. I pulled it toward me and knelt down. The tape was brittle and the top flaps opened with a crunch. There, jumbled together like trash, were pieces of me. My first marathon medal, still attached to the red, white, and blue ribbon, now wrinkled and dulled. A green beret gifted to me by my grandfather, Papa Rawl, the day I was accepted into Special Operations Selection. He died 2 weeks later. A laminated letter from my wing commander praising my decision-making under fire during a cyber attack incident at Ramstein. Beneath that, a handful of broken plastic action figures, some old notebooks from middle school, a worn-out hoodie I hadn't seen since high school. It was a museum of disregard. Not one item had been placed with care. No wrapping, no frame, no sign that anyone valued these things. They were artifacts only to me. I touched the green beret gently. I remembered the night Papa Rawl gave it to me, sitting on the porch swing with his oxygen tank hissing, telling me, "Vas a hacer más que cualquiera de ellos, mija, mark my words." I guess he was right. And still, here it lay next to a broken toy truck and deflated soccer ball. At the bottom of the box, half bent and water damaged, was my Airman of the Year certificate from Air Combat Command. I'd received it in 2019. I remembered calling home that day. I was so proud I could barely get the words out. I'd said, "Papa, I won it. I really did. They called my name in front of the whole base." His reply was as casual as a grocery list. "Bueno, Diego just got accepted into the MBA program at Georgetown. He's moving to DC soon. Oi, I have to go. Long-distance calls still cost something." Click. 30 seconds. That's how long it took for a year of my sweat and sacrifice to get folded into nothing. Now I stared at that warped paper. It used to hang in my quarters. I'd laminated it myself, and here it was, bent, curling at the edges, crammed behind a torn Batman folder. I sat back on my heels. The garage creaked. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. But something inside me calcified in that moment. A decision or maybe a resignation. They never saw me. Not the real me. Only the burden of me. And now even my victories were inconvenient clutter. I picked up the medal, beret, certificate. I folded them gently into my lap, smoothing out the edges with my palms. My fingers moved like I was handling explosives because in a way I was. These weren't just items. They were everything I'd built, everything they didn't want to display because it didn't fit their narrative. The house groaned again with the settling heat. Somewhere downstairs, someone turned on music. Norteño, probably Diego's playlist. I looked around the garage one more time. Then I spoke out loud to no one. I am not the forgotten one. I am the proof you ignored. And I closed the box again, this time carefully, like the past deserved at least one person who wouldn't throw it away. Peterson Space Force Base, Colorado, 2023. This place wasn't what people imagined war to be. No gunfire, no explosions, just endless rows of monitors in underground bunkers, and the sound of keyboards clicking like rain on a metal roof. This was where I found my real family. Captain Sarah Kim sat beside me in the Cyber Operations Center at 0300, eyes bloodshot from 18 hours straight monitoring Chinese hackers trying to penetrate our satellite defense grid. The coffee had been cold for hours, but we kept sipping it like holy water. "Rodriguez," she whispered, not taking her eyes off the code streams, "Section 7 has unusual activity." I leaned over her screen. Lines of malicious code crawled across like digital ants. "State-sponsored," I muttered. "Advanced persistent threat. They're probing for weaknesses." That's when Sergeant Marcus Johnson burst into the room. Kid from Detroit, 22 years old, genius with a photographic memory for network protocols. "Ma'am, we have a problem," he panted. "They're not just probing, they're inside." Sarah and I exchanged glances. A successful breach could compromise the entire North American aerospace defense. Satellites, missile systems, everything. "Lock down all external connections," I ordered. "Johnson, trace the entry point." "Kim, start containment protocol." The next 15 hours were a blur of adrenaline and digital warfare. We fought not with bullets, but with algorithms. Every keystroke was a tactical decision. Every line of code was a potential lifesaver or catastrophe. At 1800, we finally expelled the hackers and sealed the vulnerabilities. Sarah collapsed into her chair. Johnson fell asleep standing up. I stared at the screens showing our networks clean and secure. "We did it," Sarah said, her voice hoarse. "We." I smiled. "You two pulled rabbits out of hats. I just pointed directions." Johnson opened one eye. "Ma'am, with respect, you coordinated a 3-front cyber defense while drinking cold coffee and barely blinking. That's superhuman." That's when I realized this was belonging. Not performing for approval, but shared struggle for something bigger than ourselves. Operation Digital Shield became our masterpiece. Intelligence confirmed Chinese military hackers had infiltrated defense contractors across 5 countries. They were stealing blueprints for next-generation fighter jets, satellite technology, nuclear submarine designs. If successful, the balance of power would shift dramatically. I was assigned as lead tactical coordinator for the international response team. Sarah and Johnson were the core of the operation. We worked with Korean cyber specialists, British intelligence, Israeli tech experts. Language barriers, time zones, cultural differences, but the mission bonded us. 3 months of intensive preparation. I barely slept, living off protein bars and determination. Sarah and Johnson worked just as hard, never complained, never asked for credit. On the day of execution, everything went perfectly. We didn't just expel the hackers, we turned their tools against them, captured their command protocols, mapped their entire network, gathered evidence for international prosecution. Sarah found me afterward in the break room, handed me a steaming cup of coffee, heard the Pentagon calling it the most successful cyber operation in modern history. She said. I shrugged. Team effort. "Ma'am," Johnson appeared holding a chocolate bar from the vending machine. "You deserve a celebration. This operation's gonna be in textbooks." He broke the chocolate bar into 3 pieces, handed me the largest piece. "I don't need the biggest piece," I protested. "You carried us through," Sarah said firmly. "Take the damn chocolate." That chocolate bar tasted better than any fancy dinner I'd ever had. Not because of the sugar, but because of the respect. Genuine respect from people who knew exactly what it took. The letter arrived 2 weeks after Digital Shield's success. APO address, handwritten in the familiar cursive I knew too well, Diego's handwriting. For a second, I let myself hope. Maybe he had changed. Maybe he finally cared. But no. He wrote asking for a favor, said he was trying to get an invitation to the Defense Innovation Summit in D.C. Thought maybe I could pull strings as a senior cyber officer. Mentioned his growing network in naval intelligence and how collaboration between services would benefit everyone. Not a single word asking if I was safe or proud of my achievements. Just a request, another transaction. I folded the letter slowly, walked to the secure disposal chute behind the operations center, dropped it in. It disappeared with a soft whoosh. That night, Johnson tossed me another chocolate bar. "Mail call?" he asked, half grinning. I nodded. "Junk mail." We laughed. That was the moment I knew for certain. I didn't have to keep chasing a seat at the Rodriguez family table, because I already had one here in the mud and underground bunkers among people who would never let me walk alone. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a burden. I felt home. Sarah pulled me aside after another briefing. "Rodriguez." She looked at me for a long moment. "Leadership isn't about rank. It's about who still trusts your judgment when systems are failing and everything's chaos." I nodded. "You've got it," she smiled barely. "Don't waste it chasing ghosts." Her words stayed with me because ghosts were exactly what my old life had become. Faint outlines of people who once mattered, now just shadows in the rearview mirror. And I stopped looking back. We made a habit of gathering near the comm station late nights, huddled around metal mugs and jokes that only made sense to those who had stared down the same digital threats. We shared stories, pain, silence. This was where I belonged. Not in living rooms lined with polished portraits, but in worn boots and hands that knew how to hold weight. This was my family, not by blood but by choice, and that made all the difference. It started on a Monday morning like any other. I just stepped into my office at the Pentagon, coffee in hand, boots still damp from the rain outside. My inbox was already a war zone. I was halfway through reading a briefing when my phone buzzed once, twice, then non-stop. Something was wrong. I looked up. Several colleagues were staring at me across the hallway, not curious, concerned. Sarah Kim appeared at my door. No words, just a look. She nodded toward the break room. The television was on and there he was, Lieutenant Jake Morrison, my cousin in full dress uniform, seated on the CNN morning set. His smile was modest, hair perfect. He was being introduced as one of the brilliant minds behind Operation Digital Shield. My operation. He spoke slowly, reverently, like recalling trauma that had aged him. "It was the hardest decision I've ever made," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "We were losing control of the network perimeter. I had to step in personally. We pushed back against the state-sponsored attack. It cost resources, but we prevailed." I stood frozen. He described down to the protocol commands, network topology, even the moment of enemy retreat. Events that only someone in that room would have known. Only me, Sarah, and Johnson. And then, like the performance needed an Oscar, he paused and choked up. I still remember the faces of the team members we almost lost to system failures. We didn't leave anyone behind. A single tear rolled down his cheek. Sarah cursed under her breath. "He's using your debriefing notes word for word." I didn't speak. I couldn't. I stared at the screen as America listened to the lie, not a misquote, a full-blown hijacking, and I wasn't just erased. I was replaced. The moment the segment ended, I stepped into the hallway and called my father. He picked up after one ring. "Maya," he said like nothing had happened. "You saw the interview?" I asked. "Poor Supusto," he said. "Jake did great, polished, confident. The country needs heroes like him." I felt my throat tighten. That was my operation. He took my work, my decisions. He sighed. Look, I told him he could go ahead with it. He needed a boost for his future. This helps the family image. Family image? I nearly dropped the phone. You're already Lieutenant Colonel. What's the harm in sharing the spotlight a little? Sharing? He stole it. You're being selfish, he said. Don't make this about ego, Maya. Ego. I nearly dropped the phone. To him, this wasn't betrayal. It was strategy, brand building, and I was just a pawn in the Rodriguez family legacy campaign. Adios, papa, I said and hung up. For a few minutes, I just stood in the hallway, my mind roaring with static. Then my phone buzzed again. A colleague sent me a link, an article just published on a respected defense blog. Title: Inside Digital Shield, Rising Star of Military Cyber Intelligence. Jake's photo was cropped perfectly to show his academy ring and commendation badge. The piece praised his unparalleled tactical instincts and cited sources inside the Pentagon who confirmed his heroism during the operation. Sources. I didn't need the name. I recognized the cadence of the sentences, the way the quotes were shaped. Diego, my brother, the public affairs golden boy, had planted this story. He knew how to work the media, how to bury credit and inflate fiction. He didn't just help Jake, he orchestrated the narrative. I read it again. One phrase stood out. While senior officers remained hesitant due to bureaucratic protocols, Lieutenant Morrison took bold, decisive action. That wasn't just a lie, it was a dagger. I slammed my laptop shut and clenched my fists. Every sacrifice I'd made, every scar, sleepless night, lost friend was now fuel for a PR stunt. Not by an enemy, by my own family. No, by men who were supposed to protect me, by the same father who once called me a burden, by the brother who never saw me as more than a threat to his spotlight, by the cousin who cried on national television with tears made of kerosene. That night I sat alone in my apartment, lights off, TV muted. I stared at the ceiling and thought, this is war, not the kind fought in deserts. The kind where truth is a liability, where silence is permission, where family becomes a weapon. I used to think the battlefield was behind me. I was wrong. It had just moved indoors. The next morning, I received an internal memo, requests from press outlets for comments, confirmations, sound bites. The floodgates had opened. Jake's name was trending. The blog post had been picked up by other military news sites. And me, I had become a ghost in my own story. Sarah walked into my office with 2 coffees. She set one down in front of me without a word. Then she sat across from me and looked me dead in the eyes. You're not going to let this slide, are you? I didn't answer. She leaned back. You've kept quiet long enough, Rodriguez. You let them call you a burden. You let them take your money, your credit, your dignity. But this, she tapped the desk, this is war. I took a sip of coffee. It was bitter, strong, the kind that burns on the way down. I'm done being quiet, I said. She nodded. Then let's get loud. The email arrived at 0700 sharp 3 days later. Subject line: suspension pending security review priority. I stared at it for a full 10 seconds before opening. The sender was official, Office of Air Force Personnel Command. The tone was sterile, direct. Effective immediately, Lieutenant Colonel Maya Rodriguez is suspended from duty pending investigation into potential security breach involving classified cyber operation protocols. My breath caught. They were accusing me of leaking military intel. The attached PDF outlined the charge. Breach of Category 1 security protocol, unauthorized disclosure of operational details relating to Digital Shield cyber defense operation. The name signing off wasn't real, but I recognized the alias. Call Sierra, a ghost signature used by high-clearance staff. Only a handful of people could authorize this kind of action. One of them was Colonel Marcus Webb. He'd hated me since the cyber command restructure when I exposed flaws in his legacy systems, cost him contracts and his promotion track, and now he was backing Jake, my cousin, the man who stole my operation. This was retaliation wrapped in protocol, a kill shot by spreadsheet. My hands clenched around the mouse. They weren't just trying to silence me, they were going to bury me. I sat motionless in my empty office. Outside, DC traffic droned like nothing had changed. But inside me something snapped, not like a twig, like steel under pressure. The kind of break you don't hear until the damage is irreversible. For years, I'd stayed quiet when my father called me a burden, when Diego drained my paycheck for networking suits, when Jake cried fake tears on national television with my war story in his mouth. I swallowed it. But this wasn't family politics. This was erasure, institutional, deliberate, coordinated. I leaned back in my chair, the fluorescent light buzzing above, and remembered something. A quote from an old leadership manual I'd read during my first deployment. "Courage is not the absence of fear. It's action in spite of fear." I never wanted to be vulnerable, but now I had no choice. I could either disappear quietly or detonate. I stood up, walked to the window, and made my decision. I wasn't going to hide. I wasn't going to beg. They wanted war. They picked the wrong soldier. The room was dark except for the pale green glow of 6 monitors. Arlington, Virginia, one of many safe houses that the tech community used for sensitive work. Ghost worked like a machine, no music, no coffee, no unnecessary words, just the rhythm of fingers across keys and the occasional muttered curse. "Bingo," he said. "Someone got sloppy." I leaned forward. "What did you find?" "They copied your biometric access, used a clone on the internal Pentagon network, but whoever did it left a breadcrumb." He pointed to the screen. Login events traced to a static node inside Webb's office. Military IP, not a proxy. I exhaled sharp and short, so he didn't just approve the suspension, he executed the breach himself. Ghost nodded. "And it gets better." He brought up an encrypted email string. The header was familiar, Webb's digital signature. But the recipient, Jake Morrison, I said aloud. "Subject line, Narrative Coordination Operation Digital Shield," Ghost read. He decrypted the body. "In exchange for public cooperation with media exposure, you will be granted priority track for promotion to captain and classified clearance slot in Cyber Command, contingent on confirmation of public engagement outcomes." I closed my eyes for a moment. It wasn't just about stealing the story. It was a trade deal, my operation for Jake's career advancement. "Keep digging," I said. While Ghost continued his sweep, another message popped up on my screen. "Maria Santos, investigative journalist, sister of Marcus Johnson from my team. We need to talk. I've got something on Diego." I met Maria at a diner off I-395. Vinyl booths, bad coffee, better privacy. She was already there, flipping through a small notebook. "I started investigating after what happened to Marcus," she said. "I didn't like how the story shifted, and I really didn't like your name disappearing from it." She slid a small recorder across the table. "I've been tracking Diego's meetings. He's met with at least 4 military correspondents in the past month, all off books, no transcripts." She clicked play. My brother's voice, smooth, casual. "My sister. She's got medals, sure, but don't confuse luck for talent. Real skill is knowing how to shape the narrative properly. Maya's always been volatile under pressure, prone to taking credit. The Jake story, that's cleanup work for family PR." Maria paused the recording. "I also have a source, junior staffer. He overheard Diego saying the whole Jake campaign was damage control for Maya's image problem." I shook my head, biting back something between a laugh and a scream. He wasn't just helping Jake. He was positioning himself as the handler, the genius behind the myth, and me, I was a liability to be managed. Maria pushed a folder across the table. Inside were prints, journalist communications, metadata from stories, IPs, timestamps, evidence of pre-written quotes. They planned it all weeks in advance, she said. Before Jake went on CNN, I whispered. They knew exactly what they were doing, she nodded. They wanted you out of the story, out of the picture. I left the diner with shaking hands and a folder full of betrayal. Back in Arlington, Ghost looked up when I entered. Check this, he said. The screen showed a new email address. You recognize this? I blinked. Victor Rodriguez's personal Gmail. Ghost said, he's not careful, never was. He opened a chain of emails, plain text, no encryption, like two old men gossiping over drinks, except these two were Colonel Webb and my father. Subject line, background assessment Maya Rodriguez. Webb had asked for psychological context and my father had delivered. He wrote about me in third person. Maya has always shown volatility under pressure in family situations. She resents traditional authority structures, may require monitoring for long-term leadership stability due to personal grudges against family success. I stopped reading. Ghost whispered. He gave them the profile they needed to justify your takedown. He didn't need to plant false evidence. He just let my scars speak louder than my record, and he handed them the knife. The hearing room was packed. Capitol Hill, Committee on Armed Services. C-SPAN cameras live-streamed everything. The walls felt like they were sweating under the tension. Colonel Marcus Webb sat in the front row, full dress uniform, the sheen of metal across his chest like armor. To his left, Diego in polished Air Force blues. Next to him, Jake Morrison, clearly coached, clearly smug. And me. I walked in through the center doors, spine straight in my ceremonial dress blues. I didn't smile. I didn't waver. The air changed the moment I took the stand. The senator from Delaware opened the session. Lieutenant Colonel Maya Rodriguez, you've requested this opportunity to respond to serious allegations. The floor is yours. I nodded once, adjusted the mic. For 8 years, I served this country in silence. I planned cyber operations, protected critical infrastructure, accepted the cost of wearing this uniform. I never asked for recognition. I only asked for truth. I paused. The room didn't breathe. But truth, it seems, was inconvenient. And now I will show you exactly why I was suspended. Not because of wrongdoing, but because I knew too much. I motioned to a staffer. The first video appeared on the large screen behind me. Jake on CNN describing the digital shield operation. Polished, scripted, full of dramatic flair. Then I played the operation audio, black box feed from the Cyber Command Center. My voice coordinating defense protocols, directing countermeasures, saving critical systems under digital fire. Sarah Kim's voice, Johnson's voice. Jake wasn't anywhere. A murmur rolled through the gallery. Lieutenant Morrison was never on that operation, I said clearly. He told a story that wasn't his and sold it to America. Webb's jaw tightened. I nodded again. But he didn't act alone. Another slide appeared. Email exchanges between Webb and Jake. Promises of future position in Cyber Command tied to Jake's public cooperation. He was bribed, I said, to lie in exchange for career advancement. Jake glanced sideways, hands fidgeting. Let's move on to Captain Diego Rodriguez. I continued. Senior Public Affairs Officer, my brother. I tapped the clicker. The screen showed metadata of Diego's private meetings with key defense journalists, timed days before their articles citing anonymous sources discrediting my work. I played the audio. My sister. She's got medals, sure, but don't confuse luck for talent. Real skill is knowing how to shape the narrative. Diego didn't flinch. I did not blink. Then came the final blow. "I want to turn your attention to this correspondence," I said, my voice razor sharp. Up came the email string from my father to Webb. No encryption, just cold, precise language. "Maya has always shown volatility under pressure in family situations, resists traditional authority structures, may require monitoring for long-term leadership stability." I let the words hang. He didn't defend me. He armed my enemies. A long pause. No one in the room moved. I turned away from the screen, faced the panel. "Senators, these were not investigations. They were character assassinations, strategic, calculated, political. This was not oversight. This was orchestration." The committee chair leaned forward. "Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez, are you saying the suspension was retaliation?" "I'm saying it was theater," I replied. "And they forgot who taught strategy in this war." I closed my folder, faced Webb. "You tried to bury me, but all you did was dig your own grave with documentation. You underestimated me. That's your legacy." Then I turned to Diego. "You weaponized the media because you didn't have the courage to confront me directly. That's your legacy." Finally to Jake. "And you cried fake tears with my war story in your mouth. That's your legacy." I stepped back from the mic. "This committee will enter executive review." The chair cleared his throat. "We thank Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez for her testimony." I turned and walked out head high. War won. I didn't go home after the hearing. I walked straight to the Lincoln Memorial, pulled off my gloves, and stared at the marble statue like it might crack from the weight of everything that had just happened. Behind me, reporters began gathering. Some shouted my name. Cameras rolled, but I wasn't ready to speak to them. Not yet. Not until the official transcripts were sealed. That evening, Ghost sent a message. "It's done." Press picked up the footage, trending in under 8 minutes. Jake just deleted his social media accounts. Webb is submitting early retirement papers. I didn't smile, not out of bitterness, but because justice isn't joy, it's relief. The phone rang. Unknown number, but the voice was familiar. "Lieutenant Colonel Rodriguez, this is Chief of Staff to the Secretary of Defense. The Secretary would like to offer you a formal promotion to full colonel and a new position as Director of Cyber Warfare Strategy at the Pentagon." I let the silence linger a few seconds longer than necessary. "I'm honored," I replied, "but I'm not interested in a new rank. What I want is to rebuild on my terms." The line went quiet, then a soft, "We respect that." The headlines rolled out like dominoes the next week. Colonel Marcus Webb retired in disgrace. No ceremony, no salute. Jake Morrison was discharged from the military with conduct violations. The Academy issued a rare public statement citing ethical breaches in professional conduct. Diego was reassigned to a remote logistics base in Alaska. He didn't call. Neither did I. Maria Santos sent me a copy of the full transcript. The hearing was now part of the public record, trending on social media with the hashtag #DigitalTruth. Then came the call I'd been waiting for. "Maya," my father's voice, smaller somehow, older. "Victor," I replied. "Not Papa, not anymore." I wanted to say, "Lo siento," I thought I was protecting the family reputation. "Family reputation," I repeated. "Is that what you call it? A web of lies, control, betrayal wrapped in the family name?" Silence. "I've spent most of my adult life trying to prove myself worthy of your approval," I continued. "But your approval doesn't mean truth. It means silence, and I'm done living in it. Whatever's happened, I'm still your father. You stopped being my father the day you chose strategy over honesty. When you gave away pieces of me to protect a legacy I never believed in." I pulled the house key from my coat pocket, set it on the table. "That's for the house. I won't be back. Maya, please." "Goodbye, Victor." I hung up. For the first time in years, I felt free. A week later, I sat with Sarah Kim on the back patio of an Arlington townhouse. She poured 2 bourbons, lit a small fire in the stone pit between us. "You did it," she said. "No," I replied. "I survived it. There's a difference." She nodded. You're not going back, are you? I looked up at the night sky, cloudless and infinite. No, I've seen what rot looks like when it wears stars on its shoulders. I want to build something different. She raised her glass, to burning down what no longer serves. I clinked mine against hers, to planting something better in the ashes. We sat in silence, no plans, no strategies, just breathing. For the first time in years, I wasn't fighting. I wasn't chasing approval. I wasn't pretending I was okay. I was simply free. The next morning, I opened the small leather journal I'd carried through every deployment. Most pages were filled with coordinates, tactical sketches, fragments of intel. But now I turned to a fresh page. At the top, I wrote, "What does life look like when it's built from truth?" I didn't have the answer yet, but I knew the old answers, ones handed down by my father, by the institution, by the silent code of duty above all, were done. 3 months later, I found my answer. Austin, Texas, hill country where oak trees spread like green umbrellas and the sky stretched endless. I bought a modest piece of land, 40 acres with a small house, far enough from the past but close enough to rebuild something honest. That's where I founded Rodriguez Cyber Academy. The name wasn't about pride. It was reclamation. I was taking back the word Rodriguez, not for legacy, but for foundation. The academy became a sanctuary, not of silence, but of voice. A place where young cyber specialists, returning veterans, civilian tech leaders came to learn the kind of strength that doesn't shout, the kind that holds. We taught ethics in digital warfare, humanitarian applications of technology, resilience of mind. We told the truth about modern conflict, not just its complexity, but its moral weight, what it takes to keep humanity intact when everything around you asks you to surrender it. Some days were hard. Faces in the lecture halls reminded me of my own reflection a decade ago, tight-jawed, closed-hearted, trying not to drown in invisible wounds. But then someone would stay after class, ask a question, share a story, laugh, cry. Healing would begin not from me, but from the space we'd made together. One afternoon in early spring, my mother showed up. I was kneeling in the memorial garden, pulling winter weeds when I saw brown boots step onto the gravel path. She didn't say anything right away, just crouched beside me, picked up the trowel I'd set aside. We worked in silence, the kind that wasn't empty this time, but willing. When the last flower bed was cleared, she reached into her coat pocket, placed something in my palm, my first marathon medal, the one I thought they'd thrown away. It was polished, smooth, like it had been waiting. "Lo siento, Mija," she whispered. I wasn't brave. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I just closed my fingers around the medal and nodded. I wasn't forgiving her for the past. I was forgiving myself for carrying it so long. Today, the Academy has 200 students. Applications tripled last year. One evening, I stood at the back of the main hall watching a group of cadets laugh over notes and coffee. The whiteboard was still marked with notes from the last session. Ethics, strategy, purpose. That night, I wrote a new lecture, not about victory, not about medals, about betrayal, loss, and how those things, if faced with courage, can shape the kind of leader no school can fabricate. I opened class the next morning without preamble. What makes a leader worth following? I asked. Silence. Then the stories came. About broken commands, saved systems, mentors who failed, moments they could have given up but didn't. When it ended, I walked to the board, wrote 4 words. Honor is not inherited, it is built. I stood beside it for a moment, the marker still warm in my hand. That was the legacy I wanted. Not one carved in stone, but one planted, watered, lived, and finally let go. Marcus Johnson visits every few months, brings chocolate bars, shares updates from Peterson Base. Sarah Kim runs cybersecurity for a major tech company in Seattle, still sends encrypted messages mocking my civilian life. But most evenings, after everyone's gone, I walk the perimeter of the land. The stars are clear above Texas, unbothered by memory, untethered from bloodlines. I think not about battles or hearings or betrayals, but about the simple rhythm of rebuilding. Of mornings beginning with black coffee and the sound of students debugging code behind the lecture hall. Of planting something that will last longer than I ever will. That's enough. If you've stayed with me all the way here, thank you. This wasn't just a story about betrayal and power. It was about choosing who we become after the ashes. Maybe like me, you've carried wounds others never saw. Maybe you're still rebuilding. I hope Maya's journey reminded you that truth, when lived out loud, can be healing. Honor is not inherited. It is built. And sometimes the strongest thing you can say is everything.